Welp, finally happened. The eShop is dead. Although, to be more specific, the Nintendo 3DS and Wii U eShops no longer allow the act of new transactions, so you can no longer buy new games. Now, at this point, with how much of the Wii U's original content is now on Switch, the only draw of having a collection of digital games on the Wii U is how many different retro systems were available on the console, including original Wii games. Although outside of just the main Wii U games, all that retro stuff can easily be emulated, which is why it kind of sucks that the 3DS eShop is no longer accessible with how much unique content that this had compared to the Wii U. So at this point, there's really no easy way to access that content. Except there is. Did you know it's surprisingly easy to hack your Nintendo 3DS? Only took me about half an hour. So if you saw my video last year on this whole eShop debacle, you would remember that I talked about modding my new Nintendo 2DS XL. I did also mod that system. I more so did that just to test the waters of how easy is it to mod a 3DS. And yeah, only took me about 30-45 minutes for that. Took me just a touch longer for this. There's one step that I had to troubleshoot, but other than that, it went pretty darn smoothly. Now, before I continue, this video is not going to be a comprehensive tutorial, and I am not going to provide any help with modding a 3DS down in the comments. Basically, I just don't want to be a help desk for the entire internet. The most up-to-date guide on how to mod a 3DS is on 3ds.hacks.guide. Now, yeah, it is a written tutorial, but written tutorials are a lot easier to keep up to date compared to video tutorials, even though I did use a video tutorial, which is kind of a no-no in the 3DS modding community. I used my best judgment. I found a tutorial that was pretty darn recent and had a good like-to-dislike ratio. I have one of those extensions that puts the count back on the dislike button. And I also just skimmed the comments of that just to make sure that there wasn't, like, a big group of people that bricked their system. And that definitely is a concern for a lot of people. They don't want to lose their system or all of their purchases on their system. But according to 3ds.hacks.guide, along with other people in the modding community that you may talk to, at this point, you almost have to go out of your way to brick your system. Things are set up to the point where it's pretty darn simple and straightforward as long as you can, follow instructions. One thing about modding a 3DS is that you're going to have to remove and insert the SD card several times. Now, for most of the systems, it's not a big deal, but if you're like me and you have a new 3DS XL or just the standard new 3DS, the SD card is behind this back panel, so you have to unscrew said back panel. If you're curious, the screwdriver that comes with Personal Trainer Walking does the job just fine. I say that because that's what I used. And if you do have one of those two systems, I recommend just keeping the back panel off for the entirety of the modding process just to make things easier. And of course, you're going to need some way to plug that SD card into your computer. And a great thing about having a modded system is that you don't lose any system functionality, or at least any functionality that hasn't already been taken. And in fact, you gain even more functionality. Right here, I have a special folder set up for all of my homebrew apps. The homebrew launcher is one way to get custom software onto the system, either installing it right on the home menu, or in the case of NDS Forwarder right here, the way to open it. And speaking of NDS Forwarder, if you dump your physical DS games, right here I have ROMs, scroll down to NDS. Some of these are games that I actually have as physical copies that I've dumped to the system, and others are ROMs that I've taken from the internet. And you can even put your save data in the saves folder, and it recognizes it no problem. So we can just select one of these. How about Kirby Superstar Ultra? We hit A, and hit yes. And what that does is it puts that DS game as an actual application on the home menu. So we open it up right here, and now we have Kirby Superstar Ultra on the home menu. If you don't want to use the NDS Forwarder, you can use this application right here called the Twilight Menu++. So it sort of simulates the home menu of the DSi. And so if you don't want to install the games right onto your home menu, this is how you would open up your physical DS games that you've either dumped or gotten the ROM. Now, why wouldn't you want to put them on the home menu directly? Well, as a lot of people found out because of a recent video from The Completionist, the 3DS and the Wii U limits the amount of icons you can have on your home menu, being 300. So this lets you kind of get around that if you have a sizable collection of DS ROMs. And yeah, multiplayer does work with DS games that you've either dumped or gotten from the internet. I've specifically tested download play with a number of games, and yeah, they all function like normal. I guess I probably should show how you would go about dumping a physical DS game. Now, during the homebrew process, you end up installing software on here called God Mode 9. In order to access it, your system has to be completely off, and while holding the start button, you turn the system on. And funnily enough, the screen brightness in God Mode 9 is controlled with the volume slider. But you scroll down here to Game Cart with the D-pad, you press A, takes a couple seconds, and for DS games, I would say hit just the NDS file right here, don't do the trimmed file, and then you scroll down to copy to the output folder in God Mode 9. That's how you would dump the game. And then you hit B, and you can do the same thing with the save file. And again, that works with both DS games as well as 3DS games. And if you are dumping a 3DS game and you want to apply the save data to that dumped version, you would use Checkpoint. This does take a little bit to load up on my system considering how many games I have on here. But yeah, you would scroll over to whatever game you want to back up the save data for, and you hit the backup button. Or if you wanted to restore from a backup that you've made, you hit restore. Oh, God. So yeah, if you're closing out of Checkpoint, make sure that it's scanned through the entire system before you try to close out of the program. So while I have one of the, I guess, official 3DS themes being Breath of the Wild, I didn't originally have this theme, but with Anemone, I was able to apply that theme to my system because I got a download for it from somewhere else. The custom firmware that you end up installing is Luma 3DS. Among other things that it patches into the operating system of the 3DS, it will completely remove the region locking, or rather the region checking, if you have, say, a physical game card that you pop in that's from a different region from where you purchased your system, or if you find the ROM of a game that's from another region, it should be able to read that just fine. A lot of the extra apps outside of the Homebrew, Launcher, FBI, Checkpoint, and Anemone, you can get through the Universal Updater. So this is how I got, like, the DS Forwarder and a couple other homebrew apps like Twilight Menu++ onto my system. You just hit it, and I just went for the CIA file. Funnily enough, that's the file extension for the programs that you end up putting onto your system is .cia. And a lot of those you end up installing through FBI. That's why it's called FBI. I guess I should actually show the interface for FBI. So among other things, one of the pieces of functionality of FBI is the remote install, and you can scan a QR code. So a lot of various websites that house 3DS homebrew content, whether programs or whatever else, oftentimes have QR codes on them. The intent there is you go into FBI, hit A on here, and you can scan the QR code with your system, it'll find where to download it and just download it. You don't have to mess with the SD card, which is, again, really nice for systems like the new 3DS XL. Though if you wanted to manage the files of the SD card directly, you can get a program like FTPD. Basically, it lets you remotely access the SD card and like add and remove stuff and move things around without having to plug anything in. It's just all wireless through your local area network. And this is probably the thing that's driving a lot of people, myself included, to mod their 3DS. The H Shop. This essentially houses an entire dumped archive of most, if not all, of the eShop content from just about every regional eShop. And while the interface does kind of look stale and clinical, once you kind of mess around with things, it's pretty easy to understand. So you can download basically any full retail game that was on the eShop, any updates, DLC, Virtual Console, DSiWare, even the downloadable videos, and some miscellaneous extras, both official and easy way to access some homebrew content. And this is how I got that Breath of the Wild theme that I'm currently using on my home menu. If you go into one of the software categories, it breaks it down by region. And again, even if you bought your system in a certain territory, you should be able to play any one of these games from any one of these territories. And so you can just press A and then press A again on this screen to start the download. But if instead you press Y, whatever you had selected gets added to your queue. And so if you just do that with multiple different pieces of software, you can then hit the Q button on the touchscreen, and you see that these are all the different pieces of software that I've queued. You can go ahead and hit Install All, and then yeah, it goes ahead and starts downloading them from a enthusiast maintained archive, if it'll start. Hello? Hello? Ah, there we go. And even though these file sizes are small, the 3DS is kind of a bottleneck in that regard. Even if it's just a couple megabytes like this, it does take quite a bit of time. And while you can keep the system open while it's downloading, you can just close the system and it will still continue to download. In fact, you can see the wireless light is still blinking. And they actually put in a piece of functionality that the original eShop didn't have. Yep, right there. If a piece of software finishes downloading, the Street Pass light will glow green. I don't know if that's actually showing up as green because of my white balance setting, but it'll glow green like that whenever something is finished downloading. But if you're in a queue like this, once the next piece of software starts downloading, it turns off. But if everything has finished downloading, it'll just stay green. So you can tell at a glance roughly how the downloads are going. Now, yeah, this does bring up the point of, is this piracy? I mean, technically speaking, yeah, it is. But at this point, unless the devs have their games on more modern platforms, they're not going to see any revenue from these games anymore. So I'd consider it fair game. Although, yeah, do go check if the game that you're wanting to get on 3DS is available on another platform and buy it there, just so then the developers still get money. And also, this is really the only feasible way for most people these days to get 3DS games. The secondhand market for 3DS hardware and the game cards, the software, has shot up astronomically in recent years. Frankly, it's worth it to just get a 3DS, a big SD card. You can format up to a 128 gig card into, FAT32, and just load it up with games from the H Shop, which again, if you just Google H Shop and go onto the webpage, they have a button that you can hit that then gives you a QR code that you scan in FBI to get this on-device client. You can just download the .cia files from the HShop and load them onto your SD card, then install them with FBI, but having the on-device client just makes things way easier. This is kind of a side tangent, but the argument that having games as physical copies is the only way that they're going to be able to be preserved and saved is frankly bullshit. Like, for one, it's only preserved for the person that owns that physical copy, as opposed to a fan-made archive like the HShop. This benefits everyone. And additionally, physical games are not infallible. They do still die. A great example of this is a lot of copies of, I forget what Pokemon game it was, but in Europe, a lot of those games just stopped working because they were made with poor quality components. Which means that if you got one of those games and spent hundreds of hours in it, only to pop it back in your system several years later to find that your system is not reading it, like, that's not good. As long as you get a credible SD card, like from SanDisk or Samsung or whatever, and you make frequent backups, you're not losing your data. Like, yeah, physical media does have additional benefits, like you can more easily share that game with friends, but I don't trust anyone with any of my gaming anything out of my own site, so that's a null point for me. But anywho, the whole process and experience of having a homebrewed 3DS, it's honestly gotten me to pick up my system again and mess around with it and actually play some games again. I have a 64GB card in the system. I really want to go pick up a 128GB card just to have that extra storage. I think I only have like 4 gigs open on this at this point because of how much stuff I've downloaded from the HShop, along with, you know, the rest of my actual purchases that I made before. And having a modded system, yeah, you get easy access to games that a lot of people are up in arms about. Oh, it's no longer accessible, do all this final buying. I did do some final purchases myself, just because I didn't have experience modding a 3DS at that point. But once I modded my 2DS XL and saw that, oh, this is super easy, I just stopped all the purchases that I was still planning on doing and just got them through the HShop. And the process of modding a system at this point in time is pretty darn quick and seamless. Like, some of the things that you will be doing are moving some files around between your computer and the SD card, adding a friend onto your friend list because there's a certain exploit that is done using the friend functionality. But all of this just boils down to scroll over to this thing, press this, in this menu, hit this certain thing. Really just following basic instructions. And if you can't follow basic instructions, you shouldn't even be on the internet, so leave. And once you do that, you gain access to so much additional stuff on your 3DS. Now, I said about 3 years ago that the 3DS is dead. While that's true in the sense that, you know, new hardware isn't being produced anymore, and that now the eShop is no longer accepting new transactions, I retract that statement. With everything that a modded system can do, it brings this system back to life. The 3DS is only dead if you choose to not mod it.